Hello, people of the earth. Welcome to the Front Page Fables. I have got some amazing stories for you today. But before, the real reason for electricity. 50% and you plug it in. 100% gives that feeling of comfort. That phone, that tablet, that laptop, the toaster, your microwave. Why keep the last one plugged in? Because you like the little digital clock on it, the kind found on a $5 watch that uses way less power and takes up like 20 times less space. I used to be an environmentalist. I don't know anymore. I certainly don't act like it. Everything in my house is plugged in. I have 3 microwaves in the kitchen. Because I know the real reason for electricity. It's the same as fire and not what you're thinking. I know because of what happened in 1999. We were students at the Joseph Avery College in Bridal Veil Lake, living in the student slum off campus. Our landlord was pissed off with us because we'd refused to stop throwing parties that were, admittedly, kind of wrecking the house. He wanted us out after Christmas, but we refused, so he stopped paying the hydro bill and we were soon in the dark. Calling the utilities company would have been the best decision. There are rules against a landlord taking away services considered vital. What we ended up doing, however, was reveling in being closer to a state of nature. Another party to celebrate the dark was held, and we all got very drunk. The house suffered, and we thought it was funny. Maybe we deserved what happened. After the party, the darkness and the cold weren't as much fun. We had candles and discussed building a fire pit right in the house since there was no fireplace, but Alec pointed out, wisely, that we'd suffocate without a chimney or exhaust of some kind. Using matches and scented candles became tedious and dangerous. Alec also warned us against falling asleep with a lit fire nearby. I guess he was the smartest one. We began living with the dark, stumbling around in the mess we never cleaned up and staying on campus as much as possible. A few of the guys had girlfriends and convinced them to let them move into their places temporarily. That left 4 of us, single losers, to freeze in the dark. Alec, myself, Dan, and Arthur. All of us, except maybe Alec, were best described as sidekicks to one of the guys who'd moved in with their girlfriends. Alec was the exception. He wasn't a leader either, more a lone wolf who kept to himself, except when a house matter concerning him came up or the party was already rolling. The man enjoyed drinking. With everyone gone, he became our leader by default, a role he did not desire in the slightest. "We just have to make it till spring," he said. "Remember to shower." He went to his room. Months went by. Batteries for flashlights ran out, and so too our stash of lifted matchbooks from the hotels around Tour Hill. By then, we had changed, not for the better, but neither worse, I would say. Just different. We'd gotten used to traversing the dark and made sure to do certain chores like cleaning and homework during the day. At night, it became customary for us to gather in the living room and talk. We couldn't see each other, but it was comforting to hear their news of the day and joke around. If we had some money, we'd order in pizza and try to guess what kind we were eating by taste alone. Before the last night in that house, this story would have been a funny anecdote in a different forum, a fond memory spoken of in a few sentences, instead of what it is, what I'm writing now, after all these years of trying to forget. We sat on the couches, huddled beneath threadbare blankets and wearing all of our clothes. A winter storm actively pounded the house and city outside, the only really significant storm we'd had, and it came in late March. As we discussed upcoming exams and whether or not the snow could be used to insulate the house, we heard a noise, a knocking in the basement. It was rhythmic, intentional, like a Morse code hitting the ceiling below. I could feel it in my shivering feet. "What the hell is that?" Alec asked us all. No one knew, so no one answered. The basement wasn't finished. Just a dusty concrete floor and framing had been done for the owner to update or not at their convenience. Our landlord had mentioned adding rooms, but without a fire exit, kitchen, or bathroom, it'd be illegal. The knocking continued. "Think it's an intruder?" Dan asked, the question directed to Alec, our leader. There was a window into the basement. Alec sighed. He'd been drinking. We all had. "Why don't you find out?" It was a joke, but nobody laughed. In the dark, senses are heightened. No matter how familiar or inebriated, you're always on edge. I heard Dan stand up. "Fine," he snapped. He stomped his feet from the living room, and we heard him on the creaky basement stairs after feeling the sudden draft from the door we rarely opened. Fresh air wafted in. Maybe that window had been busted open. Maybe the basement was just cold. For a long time, we sat in silence, listening to the knock and hearing nothing from Dan. "I call his beer if he's dead," Arthur said, failing to cover the fear with his lame-ass joke. "What the hell is he doing down there?" I asked. "Shut up, listen." Alex stood up and stepped lightly to the adjoining hallway just outside the threshold of the living room. I knew because of a familiar pop in the hardwood, the one that said the stairs to the second floor were within reach, and the basement was ahead before the kitchen. I'm sure I heard something, faint whispers or a soft clicking of a tongue coming from the hallway. "Dan?" Alec asked. All hell broke loose. Somebody roared with every fiber of their body, the noise prolonged amidst a collision of bodies culminating in a steady thud against flesh. Bones popped, and Alec groaned. "What the fuck?" I asked. The noise of the attack continued, subtle wet squishing into tendered meat. I stood up. "Arthur? Arthur?" He wouldn't answer. The attack stopped, and I either felt hostile eyes upon me or reacted as if they were. The unconscious mind will always err on the side of caution. If danger is possible, best to run. Even if you're wrong, you're still alive. The other option is to fight. I should have fought. Nobody helped Alec. The first creak on the floor made me drop and crawl, squeeze under the couch by the window. It was a poor hiding spot. Only the darkness made it viable. Hopefully, whoever had come didn't bring a flashlight. My guess is they hadn't been so prepared. Probably, a thief had seen a darkened house in a storm and assumed no one was home. They broke in the basement, killed Dan, and now killed Alec. Arthur had split already. I might survive if I didn't cross the thief. But why kill someone you definitely couldn't see? How did they know where Alec had been in the hall? Sweat soaked through my clothes and turned cold. I started to shiver and clenched my teeth so they wouldn't chatter. For a long time, a very soft smacking was all that could be heard, followed by what may have been someone swallowing. A footstep on the floor by the coffee table triggered the ducked sound below, a flex and a weakened point in the metal. The knocking had stopped. Had that been the thief too? In that case, they wanted to confront the residents before robbing the place. Knocking had been a lure. Only a psychopath would do that. I felt worse and worse. The invader was searching for targets. That's why they killed Alec. Was Alec dead? Was Dan? Too many stupid questions. Fight or flight? Run or stay like a coward beneath the couch, hoping to survive? It was so quiet. I allowed small, controlled breaths only. Another footstep followed, padding softly until a tap at the end like the killer went barefoot and had long toenails. The stench that hit me supported the idea of the invader neglecting his foot hygiene. It was worse than shit, though shit figured greatly in the odor's composition. There was rot and death, a hint of soil and wet fur. I drank too much. My gut revolted, and I started gagging as vomit filled my mouth. Not enough space under the couch to roll over. I turned my head, and the bile spilled onto my cheek and neck. I started choking. I pressed the couch and pushed it off my torso so I could twist and clear my throat. The springs or wires or whatever the hell holds a couch together whined with a new weight, pinning my shins. The invader had stepped onto the couch. They made a sound like licking. They were licking their lips. The slightest gust crossed my nose. A hand swatted the darkness, searching for the next kill. Foul, hot breath filled the narrow space between the back of the couch and the wall. They were close, mere inches away, somehow poised above, savoring the moment of intense fear gradually withering to acceptance. There was nothing I could do. "I know you're there," said a quiet voice. I shut my eyes tight and thought I died when I heard a loud beep from the kitchen. The pressure on the couch relented, and the invader departed leisurely. I heard it going back downstairs. The hydro had come back on. We'd left so many switches in the on position. When I opened my eyes, I saw Arthur under the couch opposite. His eyes were wide open, and he had voided his bowels during the ordeal. I thought he might be dead, but saw his chest rise and fall. What followed felt like the worst kind of awakening. Illuminated, heated, the house seemed noisy and alien. We didn't live there anymore. It had been too long in the dark. Streaks of blood led to the open front door, turning to heavy, red droplets on the snowed-in porch, filling the plunging footsteps Alec had left behind. The trail went across the street to a covered pile about the size of his body. "Arthur," I remember saying a lot. Then we called the police, and I sat back down. Firefighters extracted us from the house and brought us to the hospital. I slept a lot there, which surprised me. I thought I'd never sleep again. Each time I awoke, however, it was in panic and terror. I told my story about 1,000,000 times to different people, including my parents whose arrival seemed magical. I don't remember when they got to the hospital. "A cougar broke into the house, son," my dad, in the presence of a constable, said. The story, according to some detective, I suppose, was that the starving cougar had entered through the basement window. Dan had been found at the bottom of the stairs, dead from a fall. His death had almost nothing to do with the animal. He'd slipped in the dark and hit his head. The cougar, for some reason, had missed his body and came upstairs, where it attacked Alec, pulling his arm off. Since the limb wasn't found, like the cougar itself, it was assumed to be eaten, bone and all. Alec had been found under the snow, where I thought. He was trying to get help from the neighbors, but died of blood loss on their lawn, buried by the storm. When the hydro came on, the cougar fled back through the window it had come through. The landlord had apparently paid the bill prior to the storm, worried he'd be liable if we died. Everything had turned on when it did by chance. There are a number of problems with this convenient explanation, which I'm sure anyone reading this can notice. I'll list a few of the major inconsistencies. No tracks or prints from the cougar were found in or outside the house. Snow, apparently, filled the exterior ones. A shrug is the explanation for the lack inside. It just didn't leave a single one on the hardwood. Seems, at best, unlikely. Second, cougars this far south in Ontario are unheard of. While there have been sightings, few have ever been confirmed. I could only find one news story about a cougar entering a home, and that wasn't in this province. Moreover, the cougar that supposedly attacked us hasn't been seen or tracked since. The obvious place to look would be the Western Gorge and Bridal Veil Lake. To my knowledge, nobody has bothered to search. The biggest, but by no means the last problem with the cougar explanation is what I know I heard the invader say. "I know you're there." It hadn't been Arthur. He can't remember much. Like me, he never really recovered, but he's adamant he never said a word, though he didn't hear anyone either. Why would I say something like that? He quite reasonably asked the one time we were interviewed together. It wasn't his voice. I know. It was a voice, however, and cougars don't talk. A hungry predator wouldn't bypass an easy meal, Dan, and wouldn't flee because some lights came on. I know better. Arthur does too. We gave each other generators for Christmas and piles of batteries on our birthdays. It's not the light it fears. It's the order, it's the warmth of civilization granted by electricity and fire. The way we're attracted to a lit hearth and turn on music to disturb the silence repels it. You turn off your lights and make your house quiet for a night. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a reason you have trouble sleeping with all the power out. You just might not realize what it is yet. I found a set of blank cassette tapes at the junk store, and someone died trying to find what they led to. The journey to discovering the first body was even more exhausting than I anticipated, and according to the tapes that I'd found in the junk store, there were still 7 more out there, somewhere in the marsh. Who knows how far we'll have to go, just to find the next one. I wondered as I waited for the second cassette's audio to begin playing. If you're listening to this, you found the first body in the marsh. To find the second, simply take 5 steps north. The narrator began, his voice playing back from the cassette player and into my headphones. But upon waiting for further instructions, I only heard silence. Wait, what? I thought to myself before the man continued. You're probably wondering how that could be possible. Well, the truth is, the body that you just found is part of a pair. A couple, to be precise. In this case, a very old couple, guilty of buying into a false dream. That of lifelong companionship. An illusion of eternal love, knowing full well that we're all born alone and die alone. When you're ready to find the next body, switch over to the third tape. Click. I pressed pause on the cassette player. There are 2 bodies here. That's when I remembered that Jess and Mike were still digging in the mud, a few feet from where we found the first body, in an attempt to find its clue, and completely unaware that there was another corpse beneath their feet. Wait, stop, I called out to them. But it was too late. Seeing the remains of the second body, Jess screamed and stumbled back, while Mike, having just pulled a small wooden box out of the ground, suddenly dropped it and closed his eyes. Another one? He yelled out to me. Yeah. According to the tapes, it was a couple. I explained. Well, thanks for warning us, Jess added. I just played it now, I replied. Well, did it say their names? Mike asked. Their names? No, but it said they were very old. Ah, okay. Why do you ask? No reason. Mike replied defensively. So what was the clue? Jess interjected. Mike picked up the wooden box that he had just unearthed from the burial site, opened it, and revealed a piece of paper with nothing but the letter J written on it. What do you think it means? I asked. It's just one clue, idiot. Mike scoffed. It's too soon to say. More the reason we get to finding the others. What are the next instructions? I switched tape 2 for tape 3 and pressed play. Click. You've made it to tape 3, which means you've discovered the first 2 bodies. To find the next one, keep heading in the same direction you've been walking, and don't stop until you find the wreckage of an old boat, lodged in the mud. Not far from it, you'll find the 3rd body. When you do, switch to tape 4. Click. We'd been trudging through the marsh, navigating the fog with just a single flashlight for what must have been another 20 minutes or so, when Jess and Mike's banter began to wear on me. You know, with the election coming up in just a few days, I really wish I could vote. Jess said to Mike. Why? He asked. 'Cause then I could help change the world. That's not how it works. You'd vote for Clinton in an already blue state, so it would basically mean nothing. You're both wrong, I interrupted. The world doesn't change overnight, and her vote would matter. But none of us are old enough to vote anyway, so can we just drop? But before I could continue, Jess interjected, calling back to Mike and I from up ahead. Hey guys. We both looked over to find her pointing to, of all things, a thick mist that was enveloping everything ahead of us and rapidly closing in. Maybe we should head back after all. Jess backtracked. Yeah, you already found a 2nd body, Mike. Now can we just go home? I insisted. But Mike wasn't having it. Sorry, losers. We gotta keep going. A vote's a vote. But we're almost there. And don't worry, a little fog's not gonna hurt nobody. That's when it hit me. Mike, back at the last couple we found, you had asked me if the tape had said their names. Yeah, so what? He replied. Why is that? I told you, no reason. Just be honest. All right, fine, he said, before pausing for a moment and then looking me in the eyes. I thought that maybe my dad was one of them. I knew it, I exclaimed, frantically pacing around the grass. Mike, are you kidding me? That's why you're dragging us along with you. Now that I know there are all these missing people out here, it just got me thinking. Maybe that's where he ended up. He replied. Dude, I began, hate to break it ya, but your dad was a drunk who went to the Packy one day and never came back. I don't know where he is, but one thing I do know is, he sure as heck ain't out here. What did you just say, Tyler? Mike growled, his face growing red with anger as he stormed over to me. But Jess jumped between us. Hey, stop. Fine. You know what? I don't need you guys. I'll find the rest of the bodies myself. Mike said defiantly as he turned around and walked away. But what about the mist? We only have one flashlight. I yelled out to him. Keep it. I don't need it. He called back to us without looking back as he disappeared into the fog. Jess and I must have been walking in circles for a good 30 minutes, disoriented by the mist, before we finally got our bearings and continued on our way back home. It's just funny is all. Pak the ka. Jess said, doing her best impression of a Boston accent, while careful not to trip in the grass. That's your impression of me? I asked, my boots splashing in the mud. Yeah, is it wicked pissa, kid? She answered playfully. Good one, I replied. Easy for you transplants to joke about our accents after you move to our town with your fancy homes, your fancy cars, and your Long Island accents. Well, you know what? Maybe I find your accent funny too. Do you now? I paused for a moment. Nah, it's cute, I replied. Cute? Jess asked. Oh, I mean, totally not cute at all, I swear. She stopped and gave me a cheeky smile. Tyler, are you flirting with me? No, I said as she took a step closer. 'Cause you know, out here in the marsh, surrounded by a sinister fog and all these dead corpses might be. An inappropriate time? I interjected, my face beginning to blush. Jess leaned in even closer, her face just an inch from mine, and smiled. Romantic. As she was about to kiss me, I saw her close her eyes, but couldn't seem to close mine, completely in shock that this moment was finally happening. But just before her lips touched mine, I felt my boots sinking into the mud and tilted my head down, leaving her hanging there, confused. "What's wrong?" Jess asked, opening her eyes, a look of disappointment washing over her face. We have a bit of a problem," I said, gesturing to the ground, where both of our legs were now almost completely submerged in the mud. "Oh no," Jess said, before attempting to pull herself out of the ground, and realizing that she was stuck. I followed suit, also to no avail. Then we looked at each other, and both began to laugh at the awkward situation we'd gotten ourselves into, until we continued to sink deeper and deeper into the mud. Jess' eyes suddenly turned from jovial to concerned, and she began yelling, "Help! Help!" I joined in, but after a few minutes of shouting, began to lose hope, accepting our inevitable demise, and the irony of 2 more bodies being added to the marshy graveyard. But just when the mud reached our necks, as we each shot each other one last look of affection, suddenly someone came stomping over and ripped us out of the ground. "What on earth are you 2 kids doing out here at this hour?" our rescuer exclaimed, as he dropped us onto a more stable patch of grassy marshland a few feet away. He was an old man with a white beard, wearing a pair of rubber wading pants that were completely covered in mud. The serial killer, I thought to myself, before realizing that his voice sounded nothing like the tape's narrator, and that he could have easily killed us when we were stuck in the marsh, but didn't. "We got lost," I replied, careful not to offer up too much information. "Thanks for saving us," Jess added. "You 2 are lucky I was out here." "What were you doing out here?" I asked, suspicious of his why someone, besides us, would be out here in the marsh so late at night. "Clammin'," he replied. "Clammin'?" Jess asked. "I'm a clammer. Ain't nothing in the world that brings me as much solace as searching for clams at night. But anyways, you 2 better be getting back. I saw the man out there earlier." "The man?" I asked. "Yes, the man in the marsh," he replied. "Whose?" "That," Jess added. "Us clammers and fishermen see him all the time, out there in the marsh. Always at night, and always digging away in the mud. Legend has it, he's the captain of that submerged boat out there, forever trying to free it." Jess and I both looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. Anyways, I'd better be getting back. Low tide's upon us, and there's clams to be clammed. You kids get home safe now. And like that, he was gone, disappearing into the fog like a ghost in the night. But Jess and I were much more concerned with what he'd told us than with the old man himself. "We've got to find Mike," Jess said frantically as she turned to me, a look of panic in her eyes. "Are you serious?" I replied. But we agreed to head back. Mike made his choice to stay. "You heard the old man. There's someone else out there. We've got to save him." "But," I began to say, before Jess grabbed me by the collar and interrupted. "No buts, Tyler. These tapes found their way to you, not us. They chose you. You were the one who was meant to get us into this mess, and you are the one who's meant to get us out of it. So please, for crying out loud, put on your big boy pants, turn around, and be a hero for once in your life." I didn't know whether to feel hurt or flattered. All I knew was that she was right. I'd never really had much of a purpose in life before finding the tapes, and in a weird way, they gave me one. So I dusted off the dried mud from my clothes, took Jess by the hand, and set off into the foggy marshland. When we finally arrived at the wreckage of the old boat, we found the nearby burial site completely excavated, the tape's 3rd body protruding from the ground, and a box with what presumably was the next clue lying beside it. And not far away, just lying there in the grass, was Mike. Half alive, his body caught in an old bear trap, its rusty jaws clamping down into his torso, blood pouring out everywhere. "I found the body," he mumbled to Jess and I as he noticed us approaching, blood dripping from his mouth. "Mike!" Jess screamed as she started to run towards him, before I stopped her and crouched down to help him. But no matter how hard I tried and tried, no matter how much force I put into it, the trap wouldn't release Mike from its grip. Eventually, I stood up and took a few steps back, knowing that my friend would soon die from his wounds, as my own blood was now pouring from my arm. Jess and I both knelt down by his side. "I'm sorry for what I said," I whispered to him as a tear rolled down my cheek. "I'm sorry too," he replied. "Did someone do this to you?" Jess asked. "No," Mike replied. I had just found the body, but couldn't see well, and accidentally stepped in the trap. But then a little while later, I did see him. Who? Jess asked. The man from the tapes. He walked by and stood there for a minute, right where you were just standing. He looked at me for a moment, then just walked away and left me here to die. The man in the marsh, Jess said. Tell me something, Tyler. Mike began, gesturing to the body. Is it him? Is it my dad? I sat there for a minute, not sure what to say, then moved the headphones from around my neck to my head, switched tape 3 for tape 4, and pressed play. Click. If you're listening to this, you found the third body. A widow, guilty of investing her entire life in that of another. Her husband, who, after sharing her life, her time, and her memories with, simply passed away one day. She should have known, as we've learned from the first 2 bodies, that love is not forever, and investing in it, a fool's errand. When you're ready for the directions to the next bodies, switch to the 5th tape. Click. I looked at Mike as he lay there, dying in the grass, a hopeful look in his eye. It was him. It was your dad, Mike. I said, unable to tell him the truth, and hoping the lie would bring him some sense of closure, some sense of solace in his final moments. He probably knew I was lying, but nevertheless, it brought a smile to his face. Thank you. He mumbled before his eyes eventually closed, and he passed on from this life. Jess and I both began to cry our eyes out as we sat there in the mud, our warm embrace counterpoint to the cold body that lay beside us. Maybe we should go back and get help, Jess said, sniffling, a sense of defeat in her voice. No, I replied, wiping the tears from my face. It's too late. We've got to keep going. We've got to find the bodies and make this guy pay for what he's done. Jess reached over and helped me wrap my plaid shirt around my arm in an effort to clot the wound as I stared down at the ground, still processing what had just happened. Mike hated this shirt, I said, unable to stop myself from letting out a laugh. He really did. Jess replied, fighting a tearful chuckle of her own. That's when I remembered the wooden box that I'd seen earlier, its structure identical to the one we'd found by the first 2 bodies. I picked it up and opened it, revealing a piece of paper with nothing but the letter A written on it. Another letter. A, I said. J and A. Jess replied, What do you think it's spelling? I have no idea. Well, we'd better find the next one then. As the mist began to clear, and Jess looked out at the immense stretch of marshland that still lay before us, I switched tape 4 for tape 5 and pressed play. Click. I saw a skinwalker. It was a few years back during a road trip with my buddy Jake. We were cruising through the desert, chasing that feeling of freedom you only get on the open road. But little did we know, we were about to encounter something that would shatter that sense of freedom and leave us fighting for our lives. We were driving through Navajo territory, miles away from civilization, when we saw a figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated by the headlights of our car. At first, we thought it was just a trick of the light, but as we got closer, we realized it was something else entirely. It looked like a man, but there was something off about him. His eyes glowed in the darkness, and his limbs seemed too long, too twisted. And then, just as quickly as we saw him, he vanished into the desert night. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild. But as we continued down the road, things took a turn for the worse. We started hearing strange noises outside the car, scratching at the windows, whispers on the wind. Jake laughed it off, but I could tell he was nervous. I was too. And then, without warning, something slammed into the side of the car, sending us careening off the road and into the desert. The car flipped over, and everything went dark. When I came to, Jake was nowhere to be found. I stumbled out of the wreckage, calling out for him, but all I heard was the sound of my own voice echoing through the desert. I searched for hours, but there was no sign of him. That's when I saw the figure from before, standing on a nearby ridge, watching me with those glowing eyes. I knew then what we were dealing with: a skinwalker, a creature of Navajo legend, able to take on the form of any animal or human it chooses. I didn't waste any time. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, hunting me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It took me days to make it back to civilization, days filled with fear and paranoia. And when I finally reached help, I told them everything about the skinwalker, about Jake, about the nightmare that had become my reality. But no one believed me. They said it was just a trick of the desert, a figment of my imagination. But I know the truth. I know what I saw that night, and I'll never forget it. The desert may be vast and empty, but it's also home to things that lurk in the shadows, things that are better left undisturbed. And if you ever find yourself driving through the desert at night, remember one thing: beware the skinwalker, for it is always watching, always waiting, and it will stop at nothing to claim its prey.